So there's been various reports going around recently that Putin is now relying on conscripts from Syria and Chechnya for his brutal war in Ukraine. These can't be 100% verified, but they wouldn't be surprising. I mean, after all, the Putin regime supported the Assad regime in Syria, so it would make sense for the Assad regime to kind of pay Putin back by supporting his war in Ukraine. Um, and of course, with the situation that Ukraine is getting lots of international volunteers, Putin's probably justifying it in his mind that it's okay there for Moscow to recruit volunteers and conscripts. Um, but I want to talk a bit about Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of Chechnya. He formerly had the title of president until 2011. But this guy doesn't deserve the title of leader. He's a complete scumbag. Let me just put it out there. That's what I think of the guy. Um, Even as dictators go, this guy is brutal on another level. Um, so there's a video which I'll post here, which just demonstrates how unpleasant he is. Basically, a bit of background though. Um, Russia had two brutal wars in Chechnya, 1994 to 1996 and 1999 to 2000, which was its main phase, and then an insurgency from about 2000 to about 2010, roughly speaking. But basically, um, the initial Chechen War, the first Chechen War under Boris Yeltsin, the Russians were hammered. There was very low morale, not dissimilar to what's going on now. Russians suffered heavy losses. The siege of Grozny was prolonged and brutal. Up to 27,000 civilians are thought to have died. It was a very brutal war. Chechnya had long had sort of a independent streak in it. That culture of the North Caucasus is a very ancient culture. Um, but basically, in summary, Russia eventually prevailed by installing this puppet, Ramzan Kadyrov. His father was also actually initially against Moscow, but then turned. Kadyrov's 45. He's been in power since 2007. Um, he has a personal interest in martial arts, so he very much, like Putin, likes to put out this tough guy image. I'm just going to read out from his Wikipedia article here, because this really sums up what he's all about. Kadyrov rules the Chechen Republic through despotism and brutal repression. Over the years, he has come under criticism from international organizations for a wide array of human rights abuses under his watch, with Human Rights Watch calling forced disappearances and torture so widespread that they constituted crimes against humanity. During his tenure, he has advocated to restrict the public lives of women and led anti-gay purges in the Republic. It's one of the worst places in the world to be gay. Ramzan Kadyrov has been frequently accused of involvement in the kidnapping, assassination, and torture of human rights activists, critics, and their relatives within both Chechnya as well as in other regions of the Russian Federation and abroad through his political use of police and military forces. He publicly denies these accusations. He publicly denies them, but there is substantial evidence. Um, as an example of this, and I'll just pause the video because I don't want to play over the sound here. Grozny TV ran a report in which Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov made a death threat towards a teenager who called him out on Instagram. And basically, he said in public that he would take this teenager out. He also publicly berated a woman on TV because she'd spoken about corruption. She had to retract this. I mean, this guy is a thug. Um, he is absolutely loathsome. So what I'm about to read shouldn't at all be surprising. Um, this is from the Eye, and it's about these reports of Chechen fighters on the ground in Ukraine. Of course, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the Chechens would have been brutal or would have been bitter enemies of the Russians. Now they are basically Chechnya in the Russian Federation. So, anyway, this is from the Eye. Chechen warlord Ramzan Kadyrov has bragged that Ukrainian forces are fleeing when they come face to face with his fighters, amid claims civilians are being slaughtered in their own homes. Reports suggest that Chechen troops could play a key role in Russian push to seize Kyiv alongside mercenaries from Russia's shadowy private Wagner Group. Wagner Group has been present in various conflicts in Africa, in Libya, and in Mali. Um, Before I continue, by the way, it may well be that Putin is looking to these more ruthless elements because regular Russian forces, I mean, we've seen them. They're teenagers, they are men who are disillusioned with the Kremlin's choices. I think what Putin's doing is looking at more ruthless mercenaries from Chechnya, from this Wagner group, who will have no issues about human rights or hurting civilians. Whereas within the regular Russian forces, there may be some discrepancies. I think what's happening actually is, you have artillery units who are bombing cities mercilessly, like Mariupol, but you have regular Russian troops who are actually refusing orders. Um, so I think there's a real basic breakdown in the Russian forces right now, between those who have a conscience and those who don't. Um, and there's been videos emerged of Russian troops who've surrendered, who basically say they feel shame and remorse, and they hope that one day people can forgive them. Now, whether they're just saying that because they're prisoners, maybe the Ukrainians made them say it, who knows? But I'm inclined to believe that they're telling the truth, that they were misled by the Kremlin. But that's a sinister development in this war, that Putin may be using more ruthless mercenaries. It's a little bit like in the Second World War. You had the mainstream Wehrmacht, and you had the more ruthless SS, Gestapo, and so on. Now, how clean the Wehrmacht were in terms of whether they conducted themselves in a professional way or not is a controversial issue. It has been said that the myth of the clean Wehrmacht, that is to say, this idea that regular German troops didn't commit atrocities, is a myth, and in fact they did, particularly in Poland and Ukraine and Belarus. So it's possible that regular Russian troops are also committing atrocities, but honestly, I think it makes sense that Chechens who are war hardened, and they are loyal to Kadyrov and by extension Putin. I really don't think it's a stretch to imagine that they would have no issues about respecting the human rights of Ukrainian civilians. To continue the report, um, according to the Kremlin-controlled Russia Today, Kadyrov said members of the Ukrainian armed forces and national battalions have always bragged about their courage, flee when they see the Chechen fighters leaving behind heavy weapons and military equipment. And he added that the Chechen fighters during the fighting show high skills, good coordination, and a high fighting spirit. I find it hard to believe Ukrainian troops are fleeing because so far they showed incredible courage. I mean, put it this way, if the Ukrainian troops had such low morale and they were fleeing, Ukraine would have fallen by now. It hasn't. I think that's more Russian lies. Kadyrov is a staunch ally of Vladimir Putin, and in February he said the invasion of Ukraine was too slow, urging him to send troops into the country to fight alongside the Russian army. He said full military coordination, the correct deployment of troops, and a decisive assault. That's all we need. We must finish what we started and do it quickly. Since the Ukrainians have twice refused to negotiate, we must change tactics that will convince them. In other words, sheer brute force. Kadyrov also has a Telegram channel which posts videos of his fighters. According to reports, he deployed 10,000 soldiers to Ukraine, including his three sons, one of whom is 14. The leader has used social media to bemoan British sanctions placed on him over his role in the war. He complained, I just want to visit, to walk around London, enjoy the views of the Thames from Tower Bridge, look at Big Ben and Buckingham Palace, wander around Trafalgar Square, to reminisce in Hyde Park, and to indulge high-minded thoughts in the National Portrait Gallery. Such a cultured man. That is laughable. Why do you not let the dream come true of a tourist who just wants to plunge into the world of Shakespeare and Sherlock Holmes? I suspect Kadyrov is trying to be sarcastic. His troops are now believed to be occupying villages to the northwest of Kiev, and there are thousands more waiting in Chechnya ready to be sent to the front. People in the village of Katyushanka, 40 miles north of Kiev, which was occupied by Chechen forces, spoke to the Times last week and said residents had been forced out of their homes. Unconfirmed reports also suggested that aggressive and intimidating Chechen soldiers were murdering people in their homes in Irpin, which is on the outskirts of Kiev. but not all Chechens are on their government side. Heavily armed fighters have joined the war on the side of Ukraine, and pictures have circulated on social media showing Chechen fighters wearing yellow armbands, which are used to identify Ukrainian forces. That will be a real thorn in the side of Kadyrov. One picture was said to be captioned "Real Chechens," not to be confused with the Kadyrovsky pigs, who are only good for photo shoots. The Dzhokhar Dudayev battalion, named after the Chechen president from 1991 to 1996, this was the guy who had a war against Yeltsin, and made up of Chechens to oppose Russia, has also been fighting alongside Ukrainian forces. Last week, the Ukrainian intelligence said Russian spies who do not want to take part in this bloody war leaked the whereabouts of a Chechen hit squad loyal to Moscow that had been sent to kill President Zelensky, but was eliminated in Kiev. It is possible, depending on what happens in Ukraine. Under Kadyrov, Chechnya has being a lot more stable in terms of the level of violence has decreased in terms of the war with Russia. In fact, there's barely even an insurgency anymore. And, Grozny has improving the infrastructure and so on. If you type in pictures of Grozny in the internet, it's lit up, there's casinos. But it's kind of a strange mix with this. It's like this combination of gangsterism and autocracy with a fairly strict interpretation of Islam. But basically, it's a thug regime. It is interesting if you have Chechens who maybe are looking for an opportunity to get back at Kadyrov for being Putin's puppet. If Kadyrov ends up in a bad way, I will have exactly zero sympathy. The guy's a thug. I mean, the way he treats Chechens is disgusting. Um, and I think that what we're seeing in Ukraine is probably going to be a lot of little proxy wars going on with score settling. And it's basically, if it isn't already a world war, if we're not seeing the start of World War Three, and I believe actually that there might already be some of the ingredients for that, then it's basically like a mini world war going on within Ukraine. Um, that's what's happening. So, yeah, I'll put that link to Kadyrov. Warning, it is a bit disturbing, and it might well piss you off, as it did with me. This guy Kadyrov is loathsome. He likes to present himself as a tough guy, but he's a tough guy who threatens defenseless teenagers and women on Chechen TV. What a scumbag. And he's one of Putin's cronies. Bit like Lukashenko in Belarus. Lukashenko laughably hit it. Putin promised him the rank of colonel. I mean, it's almost like he doesn't even pretend that he's anything other than a Putin puppet. He's supposed to be the president of Belarus, but he's just a stooge of Putin. Um, I mean, even pro-Russian Belarusians must be somewhat embarrassed by those sort of statements. Um, anyway, it's important to understand, anyone thinking that the Russians have in any way sort of any moral high ground just need to look into the sort of people who are backing Putin. One last thing, China's position. China claims to be neutral, but Chinese state TV has been behaving like Russian state TV. They've been parroting the Kremlin line. They've been talking about this being a special operation. So, alongside Russian state TV, hiding the truth from millions of Russians, you now have Chinese state TV uh, spreading lies to millions of Chinese. It makes sense. I mean, Beijing and Moscow have been close for a long time now, so it's not overly surprising. But the Ukrainians should think very carefully about trusting the Chinese as any sort of peace negotiators, because they absolutely will not be neutral. So Zelensky should think very carefully about taking up any Chinese offers of peace negotiations, because it would come at the price of being swayed towards Russia.